The BRICS bloc is about to get bigger in 2023, and by now it's really obvious that we are moving towards a multipolar world, a changing world order where it's going to be the East versus the West. And I think we all remember just last year, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS, expressed interest in joining BRICS, and that sent shockwaves across the world, especially in the United States. And just imagine the leader of OPEC, the major oil power themselves, looking to join BRICS, and that alone is a game changer. But they aren't the only ones looking to join the economic alliance in the East. We have multiple other countries desiring to join the club. We have Iran keen in joining BRICS, and Argentina having China's support to join the gang. And if this expansion happens, we're going to see a group powerful enough to challenge the G7. Now, as a group, BRICS will be able to resist sanctions, influence the financial markets, and most importantly, provide each other with the inputs to grow their economies. Now, currently, BRICS consists of the five big emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And these are all big economic giants, right? They're commodity giants, and their middle class is rapidly growing, with GDP easily on track to outpace the developed world, especially China. Now, in 2023, this could come true, and we have to talk about how significant a BRICS expansion is and how, with the right additions, the group could actually stand up to Western dominance. And this year, we have South Africa hosting the BRICS summit, and they are looking to admit more members into the group. Now, in an article from Bloomberg, South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, is championing the idea of expanding the BRICS group, and their objective is very clear. They want to counter the dominance of the developed world, and they are not hiding their disdain for the establishment. And South Africa is looking to use their 2023 chairmanship of BRICS to push for the admission of new members. And according to the party's policy document, they aren't happy about hegemonic developed countries in the global north. And I think we all know who they are talking about, right? They also criticized NATO for supplying arms to Ukraine and sympathized that China was the target of geopolitical tensions and trade wars by Western nations. So we can expect fireworks at the 2023 BRICS summit because South Africa will likely push hard to build up BRICS to challenge the West, right? We might see a BRICS Plus group, something like OPEC Plus, emerge by the end of the year and push us further into a multipolar world. And how do we know this is a credible threat? Because the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she's visiting the African continent on a 10-day tour. She's trying to build up American influence in the region. And this tells us that the US understands that Africa has enormous sway on the world stage and is a growing economic power, especially in the BRICS bloc. Now, let's take a step back and understand why countries are looking to join BRICS. And it's actually quite simple. It's basically countries looking to join an alternative economic alliance that isn't led by the United States, because the world has seen the downsides if you lock yourself into an economy that plays by Western rules. And when I mean Western rules, I'm talking about transacting in US dollars, storing your reserves in US treasuries, using the SWIFT system, and relying solely on the G7 as your customers. And in the past, that really wouldn't matter, right? Because the West, especially the United States and the EU combined, still represents the biggest consumer market in the world. Now, in fact, the G7, they are all within the top 10 countries with the biggest GDP. So if you want to grow your economy, you want to grow your company, you need access to the West, and that means buying into the dollar and the euro system. But as we have seen throughout 2022, there are enormous risks in dealing with the Western financial system, right? And let's talk about the most obvious two. Now, the first is the Western sanctions against Russia, where assets can be totally frozen. Around 300 billion of Russia's reserves are on ice and can't be used. And obviously, this was done as a response to Ukraine war, but the big worry is the unilateral power to just freeze or seize an entire nation's assets. What if the goalpost starts moving, right? And that is a credible question. And this highlights how extreme counterparty risk is if all your assets are held in one currency, even if it's the most widely used reserve currency in the world, the dollar. That is the problem. And the second issue is tied to the dollar and rising interest rates. As we have seen throughout 2022, emerging economies were facing a really bad currency crisis, and that almost sent a few countries crawling to the IMF for a bailout. Now, when the Federal Reserve decides to hike rates, suddenly there's a rush to US dollars, and this caused all other currencies to be devalued. And let's remember that the majority of energy and commodities are priced in dollars. countries had to set up their own local currencies to obtain dollars to get them. And what did this do? It jacked up local inflation even further, while the United States enjoyed lower inflation or disinflation because of the rising dollar. So in this dollar system, if you are a huge importer of commodities, you are screwed when the Federal Reserve starts to hike rates. So countries, they are looking for an alternate ecosystem to join, right? One where they can access commodities, energy and exports without needing to use the US dollar. And this is the framework we need to think about, especially when it comes to the addition of the new BRICS members. But let's understand that the deck is stacked against BRICS, especially when it comes to voting rights in organizations like the World Bank and the IMF. Now, BRICS accounts for 42% of the world's population, but only has 15% of the voting rights in the world when it comes to the IMF, for example. Because apparently, the measure there is all about GDP and financial power. But even that isn't exactly accurate as well. We can see that the biggest economy in BRICS, which is China, only has a 6% voting share in the IMF, while the United States has an incredible 16.5%. Yes, the US economy is definitely larger than China, and their GDP does exceed it, but not by 2.5 times, not by that factor. So if the BRICS expanding their membership probably has nothing to do with having a greater say on the world stage, right? Now, I believe it's going to be more practical. It's going to be a push towards deglobalization. And I'm talking about how, in the worst case scenario, BRICS wants to set up a framework of how they can trade amongst themselves, right? Independent of the West. Now, what if we get hit with sanctions, right? Maybe it's a financial or tax sanctions. Can we survive and thrive without interacting with all the big Western markets? That is the big question. And this is probably what South Africa is considering as they lead the BRICS through formulating a criteria for all the applicants. And according to South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi, many countries are finding that the approach of BRICS is one that they would like to take part in. And the 2023 summit is going to be a serious one, with South Africa saying that we will be able to indicate whether we expand and who will become part of BRICS Plus or whatever that formation might be. And this is where we sit down and quickly look through the most likely candidates that will be accepted into BRICS, because if they include in the right countries, this could change the world order. Now, there are a ton of countries that either directly apply to BRICS or express interest, and this includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, Indonesia, Argentina, Turkey, and Egypt. And let's remember that these applicants are amazing countries with a lot to offer and definitely goes beyond just the economic benefits. But I want us to focus on what might be probably the two biggest criteria, which are having a big growing consumer market, a consumer base, and being an oil producer. Now, I think the idea of having a big consumer market is quite obvious, right? If you have a growing population rising to the middle class, you'll be able to lend a lot of buying power to the BRICS group. And this is a very important part of the equation, because with a huge consumer base that's growing wealthier, you can control more of the demand for goods and, more importantly, the demand for energy. And this is why, based on this criteria alone, countries like Egypt, Argentina, Indonesia could likely be admitted. Now, Argentina and Egypt, because they are not only big agricultural countries, they have huge populations with enormous potential to grow their GDP per capita. Now, Indonesia is interesting because they have a huge population of over 270 million people, and they are a significant oil producer and used to be part of OPEC as well. And we can see that Indonesia is on track to have the fastest growing consumer class by 2030. So if these countries get admitted, we'll see the BRICS having more power, especially when it comes to buying commodities and energy. Now, let's remember the G7 price cap on Russian oil. Who can forget that, right? They could form a buyer's cartel because the countries have huge consumer bases. The West are huge consumers. And what I think BRICS is trying to do is to develop their own growing consumer base. They want to have a bigger say in the global economy and counter any Western price cap. But this is just on the demand side. The real game changer will be if the Middle Eastern oil producers join BRICS. And yes, I'm talking about UAE, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And I want us to really understand how significant this will be if just one of them joins. Now, we can see that Iran and the UAE both are in the top 10 oil producers in the world, each holding a 4% share of total production. But if we focus on Saudi Arabia, they have an incredible 12.2% share of global oil production, on par with Russia. and just slightly below the United States. But what the Saudis bring to the table is the keys to OPEC. They are the leaders of OPEC and can influence the entire group that controls an incredible 35% of global production. And if OPEC joins forces with BRICS, we'll have a group that controls more than 50% of global oil production. That is essentially a monopoly on oil, and when you have such control over the world's most precious resource, you can roll out a new BRICS currency that could even rival the US dollar. And I think this is what the United States and the G7 are truly afraid of: the breaking of the Western financial system using commodities. Because right now, we are still living in a petrodollar world. It is what it is, where countries all need to hold dollars to buy energy, and as a result, a lot of those dollars flow back into US treasuries to get some yield. And this is why the US can run incredible deficits and keep printing money, because the world is subsidizing their growth, and that is the incredible benefit of having the reserve currency. So if a new BRICS currency is created, especially if the group expands, it gives the world a choice. Now you have a new reserve currency that can be used to buy over 50% of the world's oil, plus you can access an incredible amount of goods and services in Asia and beyond. You can buy oil from Russia or Saudi Arabia and import goods from China and India. And that's why the expansion of BRICS should be very alarming for the West, because it makes the group a real economic threat. And here's the thing, we obviously don't know what this new currency will be or if it will even materialize, but if it does, it could also be backed by commodities such as gold. And let's quickly talk about gold, guys. In 2022, we are seeing purchases of gold from the BRICS nations, including China and India. And when you build up such a big stockpile of gold, you probably want to use it, right? And this is what Putin is trying to do in order to bypass the Western sanctions. We have Russia working with Iran on a gold-backed stablecoin. Two of the most sanctioned countries in the world might be about to trade with each other in gold. They don't need to trade using the US dollar, rubles, or Iranian riyal. They can simply use gold. And this is the development that we must watch, because if this happens on the blockchain, then we could see more countries start to abandon fiat currency transactions, because if you trade in gold, there's fewer counterparty risk, it's a much better long-term store of value, and yes, this will be bad news for the dollar. So we have to pay attention to the coming BRICS summit, because if they add in the right members, we could see the plates beneath our feet shifting. Now, if members like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Indonesia join, we will see a powerful combination of oil producers and growing economies. And this is going to swing the balance of power to the east. So as investors, what must we know? Now, if the BRICS group does expand, we can expect quite a few things to happen. And the most obvious is that the oil market will be split into two. Oil prices will continue to stay high for the West, but actually be cheaper for the East, especially if the sanctions are still in effect. There could be one pricing for those willing to deal with BRICS and another for those that observe the price cap. Now, the second is a growing demand for gold, because the new BRICS currency will mean lesser demand for dollars and by extension, a lesser need for US treasuries. So countries will probably look to store their wealth in alternative investments, and gold is definitely one of them. And the third is a world of higher interest rates for the United States and the G7, because if the BRICS currency materializes, it will be held more in reserves. Suddenly, the enormous bid, the consistent bid for US and European bonds, they are going to dry up, pushing yields up. And as countries like China continue to dump US bonds, there could be further liquidity problems in the treasury market. And this will mean slower growth in the Western markets, and the days of 10% here on the S&P could very well be over. Now, the rise of BRICS is the rise of de-dollarization. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Will BRICS expand in 2023? Which country is going to join the group? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.